the cabinet, we're going to have all the best people. We're going to find out who they are, and it's not going to be a politically correct choice either.
I've got some really good ideas for some positions. I think some terrific people.
We have some incredibly talented people that will be put in cabinet positions and other positions. You'll be very proud of it.
Welcome back to Hardball. That was Donald Trump on the campaign trail back in 2016, boasting that he would hire only the best people to work in his administration. A year and a half into his presidency, it's a pledge his critics say he has fallen far short of. His former campaign chairman Paul Manafort is on trial as we speak, charged with tax evasion and bank fraud. His deputy campaign chair Rick Gates pled guilty to similar charges. Now he's cooperating with the special counsel. Trump's former national security advisor Michael Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI. And in the latest example, Congressman Chris Collins, an early Trump supporter who served on the presidential transition team, has been charged with insider trading. He has denied those charges. Also, two of Trump's cabinet secretaries were forced out over alleged ethical violations. It has Trump's critics saying, "See, we told you so." And it has Democrats hoping it might stir a backlash with voters in November. Joined now by Timothy O'Brien, the executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion. Tim, what do we know about how Donald Trump hires people?
Well, you know, he's never if you're going to hire the best people, you have to be the best person. And Donald Trump has never really been the best person. He's not a sophisticated manager. He's not patient. He's never built strong teams. He's always, sort of cut through people very quickly. That was true of the Trump organization. It's been true of the White House. And if you don't build a strong team, you don't have a lot of loyalty, and you don't attract first-tier people to come onto your team. So the question then is, who comes onto a team like that? And what we've learned in Trump's Washington is that he's attracted opportunists. I think the people who came into his campaign weren't convinced that he was going to win the election, and they sought a sort of a quick hit. They could either pad their resumes or actually get some business opportunities out of it. And then lo and behold, he got elected. And so they traveled with him to Washington, but they weren't going to Washington for the most part because of public service. They weren't going there because they had a legislative or public policy agenda they wanted to enact. They went there because to a certain extent they were on the dole, the Trump dole.
And we're joined now, Ruth Marcus, columnist for the Washington Post. I think we're having some technical difficulties there a minute ago, but there she is, all set to go. And Ruth, I'm curious, too. I heard Mike Murphy, Republican strategist, certainly an ardent Trump critic these days. I heard him on a podcast recently. He said he likened the campaign team that Trump ended up putting together in 2016. I think he called it the political equivalent of the island of misfit toys, sort of making the point. We were just hearing here that, these are folks who probably wouldn't have found a home in a lot of cases in other political campaigns, and maybe if you can extend that in other administrations.
Sure. I mean, I have a very vivid memory of that when then candidate Trump came to the Washington Post editorial board in March of the election year. He unveiled his list of foreign policy advisors. They were a list of foreign policy advisors that none of us had really ever heard of. They included Carter Page and George Papadopoulos. How did that one work out?
Right. And that's the interesting thing, too, Ruth, because, of course, obviously that's led to so much controversy, speculation, investigation, and all of that. And it ends up being a defense that you heard offered by Trump allies that's essentially, hey, the guy put no effort into this, just wanted some names on a piece of paper. That ends up being the defense of Carter Page and George Papadopoulos and their role on that team. It's basically, they're essentially saying Trump didn't really care. He just wanted some names on a page. Well,
he did care in the sense that the people that he has surrounded himself with. I think Tim is exactly right. The supply is limited, right? A lot of people who would ordinarily want to work in a White House scurried as far away from this one as they could. And so you got those opportunists, as Tim said. But you also have a president, Tim knows this as well as anybody, who wants to be surrounded by sycophants, who wants that adoring cabinet meeting and all the ego stroking that he basks in. And if you're not willing to do that, he's hiring for the stroking. And if you're not willing to do that, he doesn't want you around him.
Tim, it's interesting. Donald Trump, the guy who ran for president in 2016, a lot of people would argue he was in position because of The Apprentice and because he played the guy who he fired, but he ultimately hired somebody. He had the eye for talent and all of that sort of thing. I'm wondering, though, the reputation politically now is that a lot of people who have sort of traditional political resumes on the Republican side do not want to be near this administration. Back in the days of Trump the businessman, What was the reputation of the Trump organization in that world?
It was very similar. The Trump organization was a boutique mom and pop operation. Elite real estate developers in New York laughed at Donald Trump. Major commercial banks did not lend him money. He was considered something of a cartoon character. I think people underestimated the traction he had in the American imagination that you saw in The Apprentice, in which he was selling this illusion of being a gifted entrepreneur and being someone who could spot talent. And he sold a similar illusion on the campaign trail, that he would come to Washington, that he would shake down the federal bureaucracy, that he would get things working, be a great deal maker, on and on and on. It was a very Apprentice-type promise, which he has largely not been able to deliver on. I think the other thing is that Donald Trump himself is enormously conflicted. He has more financial conflicts of interest than anybody else who's ever sat in the Oval Office. So anyone in his administration who's looking for guidelines, whether you're Wilbur Ross or Scott Pruitt, about how to conduct yourself and whether to observe ethical norms, are going to throw that out the window because the president himself is not observing them.
Democrats, meanwhile, trying to shape this as a culture of corruption argument and hoping it'll help them in November, just as it did for Democrats back in 2006 when they regained majorities in both houses of Congress. As the Washington Post puts it, quote, Trump and his staunchest allies' ethical and legal problems, even if unconnected, are piling up. They are threads that are getting easier for Trump's critics to tie into a bumper sticker argument that Republicans are out for themselves. Collins may be a minor figure in all of this, but his legal troubles land at the exact right time to make him a poster child for that political attack. I guess I wonder about that a little bit, Ruth, in this sense. In 2006, there were a number of Republican congressional scandals. I think the one right before the election was Mark Foley, the congressional page scandal, I think a couple weeks before the election. Drain the swamp, culture of corruption, that was the Democratic rallying cry. I'm wondering, is there any difference in how the public perceives all of this now, only in the sense that so much of this about Trump was aired in 2016? I guess I'm wondering how much of this was just baked in when he was elected.
Well, I think that in 2018, you've got an electorate that's pretty much convinced that the whole place stinks, that it's swampy with Democrats and swampy with Republicans. And the culture, and I think you make a really important point, the culture of corruption argument worked very well for Democrats back in the day because the centerpiece of the corruption and the corruption scandals actually were in the Congress. You had all of the Jack Abramoff-related congressional scandals, Bob Ney, people going to prison over taking money from and gifts from lobbyists and things like that. Here, it's a little bit of a bank shot. Collins might make it easier. I think that the better argument for Democrats is not just culture of corruption, but more focusing about check on Trump, check on power. People understand that this administration needs a little bit of oversight, say, and that's where that interesting Devin Nunes tape comes in. So not just draining the swamp, but overseeing the president.
Yeah, a check on the president. That is a midterm message that has always worked with only two exceptions since World War II. That's probably as bankable a campaign strategy as we've seen for both parties. Ruth Marcus, Timothy O'Brien.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.